so my voice is a little shot and my ears are a little shot too. So if I don't hear a question, let me know. Feel free to interrupt me at any time. And also feel free to get out pen and paper because I have assignments for you that we're going to do during the talk. Try to make it more interactive and learning flow. So, Designing the Future. I'll tell you this background really quick. I come from the design school at Stanford University, and this is part of the mechanical engineering department. This is actually a picture from the late 1950s. So for anybody that thinks design is a popular new term, no, it's been around forever. This is a guy named John Arnold. We stole him from MIT, like we stole most things from MIT, back in the late 50s. He is actually an industry guy. He came back to MIT because he wasn't seeing enough of the students coming out with practical knowledge, how to actually solve problems. So he came back and he started working on cutting-edge problems of the day. Trains, rail systems. And what he decided was, he decided to build a system that was grounded in practical problems. You actually had to do real engineering plus real work. He wanted to look at coaching. Coaching, he realized, was something, mentorship we call it in the real world. He realized that the university didn't exist as a respected position, so he tried to bring that back in. He wanted to get people to understand that building was an important part of actually learning. So again, you're walking into academic, a university was becoming more academic at the time. It was moving away from being traditional engineering to more traditional engineering plus engineering science. And his goal was graduating tomorrow's engineering leaders. He was very clear about it. These were the guys who were going to lead industry. The big thing that was interesting was, you can see that scary hand coming out of there. You can actually find this photo. This guy was covered in Life magazine. He was covered in Popular Science magazine. The reason was, he was a pioneer trying to get the students to think outside the box. He created something called creativity engineering, or creative engineering. And the class he taught, this very famous class, you can see the picture, Arcturus 4. He took the students who started at MIT and said to them, it's 100 years in the future, you're part of an intergalactic space mission, you are helping design new products for a planet full of 10-foot-tall bird people who breathe methane. In other words, you have to question everything. You have to question it, observe it, associate, predict. This is the earliest version of design thinking we know about. And he was trying to get the students to decouple from today. Very simple. So we come from that, and this is actually what happened at Stanford, just to give you a bit of background of where I am at there. Creative design was John Arnold, late 50s. The reason it ends very abruptly is John died very young, actually. He was out here and just passed away in his early 50s. But the people he'd already induced to say, let's do this, went on to create the product design program. The product design program is the foundation, basically, of IDEO and many of the product design programs you know in the country. We did robotic systems back in the day. If you guys have ever seen a Puma arm, you know, a Vic arm, that actually comes out of the robotics design program back in the day. We started a class 40 years ago, which is foundational, I don't want to talk about today. This was done with industry. We brought in industry, 10 companies a year. They work on student projects, four person per project, so 40 students. And that class is still going strong today and has continued forward. You can see all these other programs. We had Center for Design Research, which was funded by NASA. We started doing manufacturing back in the 80s. We did MEMS. We do HCI. We kind of do everything. And we do a lot with partners. You'll see this, you know, partners, Hasselblad Institute of Biology. Our whole goal has been to distribute this. But along the way, what's been very interesting is, as it's fragmented, it became, let's just be clear, a little less technically grounded. So that's where I came into the program. I started creating this program about 8 years ago, Foresight Engineering. And we use the word as Americans use it, not as Europeans use it. We don't mean futurism, we mean actually building. This is my test bed. This is a class we run every year. This is last year's class picture. The new pictures were taken last week. We don't have it yet, but it's bigger than ever. This is Stanford sitting over here. We have about 40 students in this ME310 class I was mentioning. These are students around the globe. University of St. Gallen in Switzerland, KIT, Germany, Aalto, Helsinki, Paris, Swinburne, Australia, got Busgrund, NTNU. So this is actually the student base we use this with. So the reason we created the Foresight Engineering program was pretty simple. Audi showed up and said to us, here's a problem for you. It's 15 years in the future. We're not a car company anymore. Build something. And they said this to engineers, which was kind of interesting. So the engineers were a little shocked, and I got asked to come back from industry. So you heard my background. You know, I'm an industry guy, Apple, Kodak, Daimler-Benz. I did a lot of the early stage through completion of products. And I was asked to come back and say, can you teach these kids the little tools you use in industry? And I said, we don't use tools, we use experience. You know, like once you've done it 5 or 6 times, you kind of just have a feel for it. And we have methods, we have models, but they're not teachable. They're something you pick up over time and you learn where they don't work. Well, I said, okay, let's try and turn this into something we can teach. So this was our engineering design path as we tell people it exists. this, of course, is the engineering design path as it really exists when you don't give people tools and methods. And we tried and pull this apart. So what did we do? We tried to extend design practice, which was a lot about collaborative, communicative, trying to get people to work with their hands, get them up out of their seats at their whiteboard. I apologize you're sitting right now, but everything we do is kind of get up and work. A lot of reasons for this. We all know the research. So we try to take the research and extract the part that we can teach without telling people there's a massive amount of research behind it. The other reason I wanted to do this was I realized that we lost a lot since John Arnold had set this up. Looking 5 or 10 years out is an engineering practice. We actually all know how to do it, but we forgot how to teach it. We don't like looking 10 or 15 years as an engineering practice. We try to do research with it at that point. So this was the system we kind of came up with. And I apologize for the lines that I wrote into the air. So our definition of foresight is really how to plan and build the future. Much less away from futurism where it's a policy system. In Europe, we realized the word foresight means the policy side of it. But we were using a word that was, to be honest, politically correct at Stanford. No one owned it, so I could. It's kind of the way it works at the university, as you know. We picked it up. The big part we were trying to do is making choices today. You know it's going to influence future action because as an engineer, you have to start building today. You can't wait 5 years. And the biggest piece that actually became really interesting was we realized over time that bringing ambiguity back into the engineering process was actually really important because it had been removed over the years. Since John Arnold set up the program in the 50s, you guys realize operations research pops up, decision analysis pops up, all systems that are meant to reduce uncertainty. Well, it's not uncertainty that we're trying to reduce, we're trying to retain ambiguity. And what's the ambiguity? Ambiguity is the infamous fourth square of the Uncum model. We're not sure that we don't know it or we do know it. We're just not really sure what we don't know. And that happens, we don't know what's going to look like. So the easiest one is, what iPhone version are we all going to be carrying in 5 years? Well, hell, it's not even the right question. We don't even know if it's going to be an iPhone anymore. But we know we're probably going to have access to information, but we don't understand it yet. So do we sit on our hands for 5 years to see what Apple releases to the world and saves us? Or we build. We have to build, but we have to keep certain questions open. So we tried to teach the 20-year-olds how you keep questions open. And that's where a lot of the system came from. Ambiguity is very high at the beginning of the problem. You're hoping you're going to remove it at the end. Interestingly, unlike uncertainty, which you deliberately want to remove by the end of a problem, by the time you're shipping your product, ambiguity might remain in your product. So what's the easiest thing to think about? You've shipped a product you worked on for 5 years, but there's still ambiguity. Where's the ambiguity exist? Do the customers like it? I mean, easiest one. You can't remove all of that. So you start having to go back and iterate on the problem. So the ambiguity curve comes down. This is something we use. One of the funniest stories we had was we were teaching at the Tata Management Training Center in Pune, India. We had a bunch of very senior engineers. Kirloskar Brothers, Tata, of course, John Deere, their division over there. And I can tell you for the first day, while we were trying to get them to walk through this early part of the process, we had the angriest Indian engineers I'd ever met. And the reason was they just kept yelling at us and saying, our entire job as Indians and as senior engineers was to remove uncertainty. That's not what we were trained to do. We solve problems and build things. And we said, no, this is part of it. But let's back up a little bit and understand a little more. And by the end of it, this ended up proving to be one of our best communities of engineers ever. Because they knew how to take it to completion, that they could walk back and feel a little, once they learned how to be uncomfortable with the ambiguity and then get comfortable, they were able to go forward. So this is a tool set we built. It was shipped about, let's say, 3 years ago now. We haven't updated since. There's an updated version coming. Each of these is a simple tool. So how many people looking at these simple graphics recognize something they learned from business school or engineering school? Usually the easiest one is they can look at XYs right here, competitive matrix. You guys recognize other stuff? Technology, advancement, metric analysis. You guys recognize cone of uncertainty, usually to the right. We're all going to put our cones of uncertainty out there and talk about how, as things go forward, where our uncertainty increases. IPCC graphs have that a lot. Post-mortem tools, these do show up as post-mortem tools. And you'll see some references to DARPA. And the reason is, after we built the first 9 tools, we found that what everyone asked us for is they said, this is great, you're helping us understand how to design the future. The question is now, how do we get our entire company to figure out how to do this? So we realized it was a culture issue as well. So we asked ourselves, what culture, what organization has been predictively reproducing innovations over and over for 50 plus years? Now, I'm sure we could have picked you guys. We didn't know anybody here. But we ended up picking DARPA, which I think most of you would recognize. They've got to reproduce a model of innovation, pretty radical innovation too. So we went to them and said, explain to us how your entire organization works. And one of my colleagues spent 2+ years working with them and documenting everything they did. And then when she brought it back and realized that it was completely non-transferable to the real world, For example, DARPA retains no IP. DARPA actually has no engineering employees. They have program managers who try and create these huge networks of external invention, and then they don't bring anything inside. Well, of course, I'm sure you guys would love to be part of that, but you don't necessarily want to be just giving lots of money to random people to come up with stuff you don't know. But what could you bring in? And that's where some of these other tools came up. One of the simplest ones, DARPA hard test, how to measure whether your technology, invention, or vision is really hard. Is it working the way you want it to? So we built these tools, and I'm only going to go through two today very quickly. I'll do context map and future user. The reason is the context map's the easiest and most interesting one to understand. The future user is the one we found has the strongest pull inside of large companies, particularly software companies that do a lot of persona analysis and design right now. So, context map. It's a simple tool. We draw these petals. You can imagine why. When you guys get your notebook out in a minute and try and ask you to draw them, or if not, I'm going to make you guys go up with whiteboards so you can bring paper. Drawing 8 petals is pretty simple. Now, what we're actually doing, all of our tools are actually meant to be divergent and convergent at the same time. So you guys all know your creativity theory, right? You need to diverge for a little while to let everyone get their ideas out on the wall, make everyone very happy. But you actually need to converge to get to a point to move forward to the decision. Well, we looked at a lot of the tools we had inside the school, and we said that they're either very convergent-based, problem-solution oriented, or they're very divergent. The classic divergence is brainstorming. Let's just go up to a whiteboard and put up 100 Post-it notes, and you never know when to end, except you kind of call time and go get a break. We decided to try and build something that worked on both of them. So this is what actually came out of a number of years of working with, notably Audi, Daimler-Benz, and nowadays we're picking up Airbus and a couple of the larger, heavier industries, larger projects, 5 to 10 year frame. Basically what you do is this. You draw up the 8 petals on the wall. Usually you're doing it with a team. Doing it by yourself works just fine. But imagine you're with a team, so I can grab you guys and put your whiteboards in minutes. And I say to you, go through the 8 biggest issues on your project you're working on right now. What are the 8 things that you guys think are really important? So you pick your little project team, you go up to a whiteboard and you say, let's just discuss why we're all here this morning. You draw the 8 petals up very quickly. It's very easy to draw them. Even bad, they still look the same. And you say in the team organization, let's get the 8 ideas out there. So this is actually one we did with issues facing air freighters. Client was actually where it came from was we were working with Air Canada Cargo's division. 3rd largest cargo division in the world after KLM. Yeah.
How did you come up with 8?
Yeah, so I can go through that
more
one.
or less?
So all of these tools come through iteration on campus. So I work with students, and then we go off campus and work with companies. The 8 came through practice and through understanding what we're trying to do. We were looking at complexity and how many problems and retaining the complexity in the issue. So if I said to you, let's make a problem up with 3 features. I'm already predisposing the solution, it turns out. Once I've gotten down below about 4 factors, I'm kind of narrowing down for solution. We found that if you kept it up above 5 or 6, it kept the problem complex in that people didn't try and automatically solve it in their head. Once it went higher than 8 or actually 9 or 10, the problem just became a whiteboarding session again. You were just throwing words up. And what we found is that through practice, if we let people, we would put up lots of different numbers. We'd put up 5 and 6 and 8. If we put up 4 or 5, people wanted to add more. They were very deliberate. If they wanted to really look at what's the big picture of the problem, they would add more of them. If we put up about 10 plus, they'd get tired at about 7 or 8, and they just didn't know where to go. And then they'd get tired, and they weren't sure they were getting it right. When we put up 8, it turns out it works really well. So we backed it out and said, what's the theory behind it? Well, the theory is you look at complex problems. You start saying complex problems from a product perspective, not complexity theory. How many features can we keep in our heads at one time? When we actually go through and look at our MRDs and our PRDs, what do we actually end up with? How many different areas, how many different sections? And it turns out that if you kept it at around 8, that was what people liked working with. So when you go back and you look at how many ideas we keep in memory, there's a lot of things there that we think could be the foundation of it, but realistically, it's practice-based. And we've ended up with this now. It's stayed at 8 for about 6 years, and you very rarely find people getting frustrated with that number. Whereas when we go and experiment every so often and try and go up or down, we get very frustrated with it.
So as part of this framework, did you talk about how one arrives at a particular set of 8?
Yeah. We don't care.
There could be a process before that,
Yeah.
from a 20 to come down to these set of 8.
Very much, and we don't. So the first part of it is we want to get a team to talk to each other. We want to get them to communicate. The second thing is we want to get them to capture and keep going. So a lot of usual way this tool is used is, hey, pull your pen out right now. Start working on what your team thinks they're going to do. So everyone get at the whiteboard, just talk, start talking together. If you bring experienced people into the room, we all kind of will just start talking about it, and very quickly gets the big problem out of the wall, and we keep going. So you're working from us in human memory and what we know. If you're talking with a 20-year-old, that's where it becomes very interesting. They don't have a history of, we were doing this last night, some students from the Jordan area are working on an energy problem. And to get them to say what was an energy problem made up of, required the entire classroom to sit there and actually walk through it and try and understand what it was and get them all to feed into it. Kind of like a brainstorm. We accept that, it's a brainstorm in some ways. They didn't have experience, so they were Googling, they were searching, they were looking up, and we finally got them to get through the aid, and while they were doing it, they were discussing each of the pedals. They were discussing what do those key terms mean. The contrast with this is really the brainstorm. We don't want people putting hundreds of Post-it notes up on the wall, only because no one's really sure where that goes. And if you see those big brainstorms, it really comes down to most people get them right when they're good at it. I'm pretty good at it, so you know, give me a page of 100 Post-it notes, I can probably find some thread in them. A lot of kids couldn't do that. When we brought it to industry, we found that this saved time by just saying to people, jump up, work on it really fast, keep moving. It got the team to really show consensus. There was a whole series of things going behind this. We just made it as one simple sketch tool just to create the collaboration side. And all of our stuff is built that way. All the tools you saw there, there's probably huge foundations to it, but we just tried to build it to make it fast and quick. Capture the complexity of the conversation and move on so that you can then come back to it later. For example, this isn't the right 8. This is what one team did. And 4 of the other teams in the group did something different, and then they can all talk about it. But more importantly, they got it on the page as a team. They can then talk about it and move on and start doing another part of the problem. And then 6 weeks later, when they go back and go, oh geez, wait, we forgot something from that one day, instead of the whiteboard that got erased with 20,000 words on it because it was a brainstorming session, instead of hundreds of Post-it notes, they can't figure out what they took a picture of the Post-it notes, but they can't figure out what's there. Or instead of the white paper we've all written, what they can do is they can look for the for the photo they clicked on their iPhone and say, oh, here's that picture of here's that morning we had that one part of our discussion. And that's the use of the visual tools. Is when you take a picture of it, you can look it up again later. I've got pictures from India 8 years ago. I've got pictures from Germany, South Korea, and foreign languages. I mean, it's all written in Korean. You'd immediately recognize the tool, which becomes an interesting part of it as well as the knowledge recovery part of it becomes very important. If you can create the visual language, of course, we know that. Let's go back and look at it faster than just lots of whiteboards covered with words that I can recover later. But there could be pieces behind this. We created this just kind of a brainstorm capture. This is another one. This helped us. This was actually done by a student who was trying to understand. We said, what's the future of megacities? This was a problem we were doing for BMW. And what he did was he went and read a very seminal book, Urban Futures 21 by Peter Hall, a British academic who just passed away this summer. Amazing urbanist. And what this kid did was he was reading the book and trying to just extract what did Peter Hall, this eminent guy, think the entire future of cities was going to be about. It wasn't to say it was right, it was just a quick capture that the student could then throw up on a slide and say, well, this is what this eminent guy thinks it's about. Let's look at all the other ones. And all the other ones ended up looking something like this. Another use of the tool. We started breaking it. We began to look at the comparisons of the megacities. So using a modified version of what Peter Hall had, we basically said, well, what's the expected change in these megacities? So in Tokyo, we said, okay, high change is going to be in red. A lot of microcars, intelligent transport systems, low ethnic diversity, and a growing aging population. So those are things that were changing very rapidly. What wasn't going to change? The core of the city, the high use of public transit. That was Tokyo, just the way it was. Now you switch over and say, okay, does anyone else have a yellow or red? Well, Washington, D.C., and this was done 5 years ago, was seeing an increase in public transit. You were seeing high-sharing public transit inside of New York City, but it wasn't going to change. People weren't going to be changing their behavior. So we started looking and saying, where do you find the high aspects of change? And this was delivered back to BMW, because BMW posed us a question. They said, what's the future of BMW in megacities? We actually walked back into this problem and said to them, do you really want to know what your future is in megacities in 15 years? Because the megacities aren't where you sell your cars. You don't sell your cars inside of Kolkata. You don't sell your cars inside of Mumbai. Well, you sell your cars to people in New York, people in the Bay Area. Those aren't megacities, and they're not going to be. The megacities are becoming poorer and bigger. And it was a real wake-up call for them. So they had to revisit their problem and start looking at it a little better. And this was the part that let us step back before we actually had to solve the problem. So I'm going to ask you a real quick question. Grab some paper, grab a pencil. Do you guys have paper and pencil? Get whiteboards. Go grab a whiteboard. Try real quick. Draw the 8 petals. Draw the 8 petals. Think about the problem you're working on. If you've got someone else in your team, lean over to them and try and write down what are the top 8 issues that you're working on the problem right now. And the bigger part becomes interesting. You do it by yourself, and then you take this to your team. Does your team agree with you? What the biggest 8 issues are? I've got a pen too. Yeah. I've got more pens. I carry way too many pens. No, wait, never do this with pens. I do, and I go more in my bag because I always run out of pens. So draw the petals. You can draw them any way you want. And think about, say, the biggest problem you're working on right now. So the question is, what would you put in the petals? Well, what are the 8 biggest important things you're working on in that problem? So if some of you are doing something with a customer, you might say, hey, the user is really important. Well, that becomes an interesting argument. Is it the user? Is it the subscriber? Is it the partner? I mean, just the language you use alone when you're drawing these becomes a very interesting predictor of how does your team talk about the problem it's working on. You got one there? What are you working on? Yeah, they draw anywhere. So what are you working on these days? Watson, generally. So what is it? Okay, so architecture, the one thing. Which might be very different than, say, what the Watson Life team is doing down in Austin, where they would never put architecture because they're not actually working on that. Maybe. What else? What's it composed of? You know, does it have users? Does it have customers? Does it have core technologies? Sure. Is it long term? Is it today? So are you working on, in your work, are you working with customers? Partners? Are they the same or different? Yeah, they're different. So I'd write partners, maybe customers. What's the difference between them for you?
Well, there's some similarities that the customers are using the solution, whereas partners are kind of collaborative for other customers.
Right. So someone you sell it to and walk away versus someone who's willing to put up with the pain of your helping. So, yeah. What else? I mean, and I'll put something on cognitive. That's good. And I'll add something. Imagine I was one of your partners. You know, I'm going to add the future because a lot of it to me right now is it's all about and then, which is a big part of the promise. It's, you know, it's not just today. This is rolling out and it's going to continue on. So from the partner perspective, if we start working with you today, we get access to technology that's going to get better and better and better. Versus I go and buy a version of SAP and like, well, no, the reason is I need to solve problems today. And that's why I'm buying it, that's why I'm implementing it. Whatever you're doing in 3 years, wonderful, but I don't actually care because you're not changing the technology at all. What else is going to solve? So you say it's cognitive. What types of problems does it solve? Problems for today, problems for tomorrow. That's interesting. And that might be from a partner perspective. What they'd be talking about is you say, okay, it's products today and tomorrow. And the reason that's interesting is that's a huge offer to partners, which is if you work with us today, you're going to build future products. But that means you have to get the partner to understand what the product could look like in 5 years. So that's actually where we'll go with the next little tool is you say to them, okay, you know, your product can't exist for 5 years because we're going to partner with you now and work on something for 2 years. Then you're going to take 2 years to build it. That scene to capture was the last one, discovery and engagement. Interesting. So, simple capture. You can see how we can converse around it. You can get the team to work on it. Is it right? It's a snapshot. That's what it's meant to be. It's quick capture and time with the team. The reason we use it with the younger kids is it gets the big idea out there. They can't necessarily articulate it by themselves, so they need a team to work on it. The reason we do it with older people like us is that it's a great way to bring a team together at the beginning. It's a great way to get partners together. Who's older? Yeah. My 20-year-olds who keep dropping out of school to start companies. Those kids, they're like, oh, let's meet at the cafe. What, you're not on campus? No, I dropped out. We got another company. We have our seed funding. I'm like, that was twice yesterday. I'm like, oh, you guys gonna show up for class? Sure, we're not in school anymore. We'll show up for class. Okay, that's interesting. I've lost 5 kids this quarter. They've all dropped out. It's interesting to work with. The reason you do it with older teams is simple. One, we all walk in with so many loaded expectations to a project meeting. So usually you walk into a project meeting, I'm going to go from Airbus last week. You walk into a project meeting, you get marketing in, you get product team in, you get quality team in, you sit down, and the first question someone goes is, okay, what should we start with today? And eventually we figure out where we want to go. We've actually taught our 20-year-olds to get up in the room and be like, hey, well, let's talk about why we're here today. Grab a pen, draw this up, and lead a conversation that they can't actually derive themselves because they don't know the information, but they can walk us through it. And in doing this, you saw we were kind of conversing. We were trying to get things out of the table. We were trying to say, okay, if you've learned how to do it, you guys already learned, so now you're experts in this. You can convey it through the entire company. You can lead anyone through the conversation very quickly. You notice it was a brainstorm. You notice it was collaborative. But you noticed it kind of had to end, which is why it got to the 8 petals. Like, we didn't get frustrated. Jeff could fill them out very quickly, and now we can move on to start doing something else, which is, okay, so if you're the partner here today, and we're going to talk about the products today and tomorrow, let me show you now, let me start showing you where products are today that people are building with Watson. Let me show you products that are potentially coming out because we know people are working on it, but they're not going to be for 12 to 18 months. And let me start talking about where your product could be, which now begins to engage the partner in another set of the conversation. That was one of our later tools, was just start talking about how do things progress. Try it on the whiteboard, try it at home. One of the interesting ones we ran into last year, again, a very hard conversation to have. Future of learning. At a university is a high value question right now. Everyone's working on it. So Stanford was about to start on a 1-year research program, the future of learning. I happen to have 3 or 4 of the students that were going to lead the program. So we said to them, okay, whiteboard, really fast, future of learning. And they drew their maps, and we stood back and we said, is that right? And they all looked at it and went, oh, hell no. I said, what'd you draw? Future of the university. Institution, huge endowment, buildings. I said, okay, next one, do it again. Future of learning. Bring it closer to you. So they drew another map. Guess what they came up with? It still wasn't the future of learning, and they noticed it. It was the future of teaching. So now it had things like homework, it had faculty, it had lessons. Do another one. Future of learning, bring it really close. They didn't look anything at all alike. And now you're beginning to realize one of the issues that goes on in a place like university these days is what the institution wants to do, what teaching is needed for, and what students perceive as learning are radically different things. And we all know this from our childhood. This is not new. But the fact that they could, in about 10 minutes, lay all 3 of them out became very important for them. Because over the next year, they did a very big program funded by our president, Hennessy. And what they came up with at the end, you could have actually presupposed on the first day they did these 3 maps. Because they came up with recommendations that the school wanted to see. They came up with recommendations that made the faculty feel very important. Always important thing to do. And then they came up with 2 of the 4 recommendations were actually all about learning. And they really had nothing to do with the school or faculty. It was independent of that. It was how the students would learn in the future. One of the biggest requests from students, we want more time abroad at other schools, at other institutions, learning. And we want Stanford to enable that. It was a very interesting request. And you realize very quickly, like, well, Stanford doesn't have anything to do with that prop rather than signing a couple of agreements. Students are demanding it. And actually, their school's now going to start going forward with doing it. So very quick way of getting 3 snapshots on a very hard problem. Where does this go today? Tying it back into the generational thing. 20-year-olds look different than 40-year-olds. How do you start designing for the future when you really want to go out and look at the user today? You want to do some user studies, you want to model them, but the person you're studying today might not be the person you're actually going to ship the product for in 4 or 5 years, or 10 years, or 15 years. Research organization, you guys get this. You're going to put stuff together today that isn't going to ship in the market for 10 or 15 years. So if you guys decide to do user studies or A/B testing or anything like that, what would you do? Now move into a product organization. Part could be IBM, but let's go to an Audi. Their product goals are 5 years. 5 years in product development and engineering, 5 years into research into product development, and 5 years strategy into research. So they're looking out literally 5 to 10 years on their certain cars, their next generation, and they're trying to understand, how do we build for that when we don't know who really the customer is going to be? Unless we created this tool called Future User Tool. This was also came through practice. What it came through was, we're a design program where everything is about user, 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 study the user. So we said to ourselves, if I have a user today, and I need to figure out how to ship to that user in 5 to 10 years, who is that user in 5 to 10 years? So, I'll put those questions at the end. Imagine this was our customer today. Imagine I'm a consumer goods company, and I'm shipping to Amy, and Amy is 34 years old. She's our customer today. But imagine I have a product that I'm not going to ship for another 5 or 10 years. Right, building a new generation. Is Amy still my customer in 5 to 10 years? If my customer is 34. She could be, but I have to stay with her. I'd have to age the product. I'd have to age who she is. So I could do that. But if I say, no, our core demographic is 34-year-old women. Who's my customer today? Amy's too old. So it's Amber. Who is Amber today? Amber exists already. So my 34-year-old in 10 years is a real person. She's 24 today. What do I do about that? And this is where we started to try and build a future user tool. It's a comparative analysis tool. It's pretty simple. Drawing it like this on the whiteboard is a shock to most companies. You get up and you say, you've done your persona analysis, you've done your user studies, but this is not your customer in 5 to 10 years. You've done this study. They've usually done it. They've got all the people. They've done. Microsoft is a particularly very good example of this. Lots and lots of user studies. Yeah.
But somebody might argue that if you try to find from Amber what she might need in 34, when she was 34, she might still look up to Amy.
Exactly.
And
So
try to look at
no,
Amy.
that's the trick of the tool. So what we start to do is say, well, we actually do need to understand what Amy did, and we need to understand how she aged from 24 to 34. We then need to say, well, we don't know exactly how Amber is going to age, but some things are probably going to be consistent, some things are going to be different. Interestingly, this became the most important part of working with long-range planning groups. A lot of groups look for the edge cases. They look for the black swans. So, okay, what are 2 obvious differences between Amber today at 24 and Amy at 24? Simple difference. Amy didn't have an iPad. Amy might have had a cell phone. What else did Amy not have when she was 24? Uber. My 20-year-olds are the biggest users of Uber you've ever seen. They've just used Uber constantly. They don't even drive their cars anymore. They have cars, though. They still have cars, but they don't drive them. Cloud computing didn't exist back. I mean, we had things called servers. You guys remember those, right? We log onto the server, we had to have a password in. That's what Amy remembers. So we're already seeing some differences between Amy and Amber that might affect things going forward. And that's where you start to ask the question, how does this affect how they might go forward? Yeah.
How do you account for the acceleration of change? I mean,
So it's an acceleration, and that's a very interesting question. So you say to yourself, okay, the key here is to start generating questions. What does Amy do and believe in today? How has it changed over time? What does Amber do and believe in today? How do we compare the 2? So the trick is, I can go study her and do a huge persona analysis. I can study Amy. I can look back in time and begin to say, hey, here's the thing. So the acceleration issue is a classic one. Certain technologies are accelerating at an astounding rate. Certain technologies are not accelerating at a very high rate. So what technologies that we use daily are not accelerating?
I guess food, clothing, and shelter.
There you go, exactly. You start going through the things that we don't think are going to change much. So the classic story I used to tell was I would say to people, what do you think Amy had for breakfast 10 years ago? So she wakes up in the morning, she puts some clothes on, she washes her face, and she goes to have breakfast. In America, she's probably going to have cereal. You know what? I bet as Amber ages into Amy, I bet she's going to get up in the morning, wash her face, put on some clothes, and eat breakfast. Probably cereal. It's a classic story I used to tell. Guess what article I just read about a week ago?
Cereal
sits through the floor.
Yeah.
I mean, but you wouldn't have known to look for that. But now I do look for it because I'd always been looking at breakfast cereals and saying, okay, they don't change. What used to be the issue as well, even for Amy, 10 years ago, it was likely that she then packed her bag up, walked out the door, and went to an office. That's untrue for Amber.
No.
She doesn't go to office anymore. So we're beginning to see changes already. Is that going to accelerate? Does it have to do with generational beliefs? So technology expectation as well. Amy got her first cell phone when she was probably about 24. When did Amber get her first cell phone? When she was 14. Now we all know the classic thing about 14-year-old girls in the US, right? They are the group that adopts any communication technology that would be superior in the future is adopted by 14-year-old girls first. Highly communicative, don't have any built-in preferences, and just love adopting new things. So, you can look at the history of most technologies, and at some point or other, the 14-year-old women were the biggest user. You begin to use that and saying, okay, her expectation of mobile, her expectation of instant on-demand is very different at 24. So as she begins to age into Amy, so let's say that when we did our study of Amy, and again, you can do these with real studies. Let's say we did our study of Amy. We found out that she got married at 29. She and her husband bought a house in Mountain View when they were 31. Okay, now let's do the math. We're already finding that this generation, at least the older kids in it, are pushing off marriage even further. It wasn't, I thought Amy was bad enough. Now they're pushing it off even further due to just emotional insecurity, due to whether they want to get engaged that way, or more importantly, whether they can afford it. So we're seeing all these different issues mixing and pushing it off. So we're already seeing that. So we say, interesting, question mark. Do we think that Amber is going to be married and settled down at 34? We don't know. So let's leave it as a big question mark that we're going to watch going forward. Now, if our product is really dependent on her getting married, so we're a wedding company, we better really be worried. If, on the other hand, our product is a car company, We should still be worried. Why should we be worried about all the millennials pushing off their marriage dates?
They're only buying bigger cars.
They don't buy minivans. And if they don't buy minivans, what the hell are we going to do? And if they don't buy minivans, they don't move up to SUVs. When the kids get bigger, they have to go to soccer. So you're seeing how every company can use this kind of like, the person's moving into the future. Let's look at the questions today. We don't know the answer, but we know questions are changing. One of the things that we don't know. So Amber, who's had a cell phone since she was 14 and just believes that it's a God-given right to have a cell phone, how many times does she upgrade her cell phone a year? Two times a year now. Twice a year she's updating her cell phone. How often do you think Amy updates her cell phone? Buys a completely new one?
It's going to be 2 years.
Maybe, exactly. Interestingly, not anymore, because they're so desperate to get the new ones that they all moved to things like T-Mobile, which is why T-Mobile changed their entire plan. It was like, hey, you want to update every year when Apple comes out with that new one? Go for it. Or you want to update with Samsung? Go for it. So they've not got a yearly cycle going on, and they're just tying us in, right? This has to do with expectations. Now, if you went to someone my age, which is 10 years older, I'm that kind of thing. I'm like, oh, when does my contract end? Crap, I want to buy that new iPhone. But I think, well, it works fine. I don't want to spend the money. It's interesting. We have different expectations of technology. Of course, my generation, the one above it, was the one who you said, hey, there's a new PowerBook out. Oh, I buy the new PowerBook all the time. Like, well, no, they were home MacBooks, right? I worked on those. I buy them. I always had to do it because they were my work technology. Phones, they're kind of interesting. Amber's very much about, right now also, the instant gratification economy. So she will instantly look for, when can I get it as fast as possible? How many companies right now are trying to change their product scheme to deliver products, physical products, instantly? Every one of them. You guys saw this discussion of Amazon yesterday using taxis to deliver goods?
Yep.
I mean, this is part of it. How can they use any kind of infrastructure to deliver as fast as possible? Because they demand it. One of the last ones I'll leave you with, it's interesting. When Amy was 24 years old, 10 years ago, what do you think her monthly ephemeral spend was? The kind of money she would spend on things that really garnered no value to the next month. Example, insurance doesn't gain, you don't gain money, you're not saving it. Cell phones, Spotify, Uber. Things you just spend money on. They don't reduce your health, you don't gain anything. Well, when I was 24 and graduated from college, I had a shared phone in the house, I paid like $8 for it. I had shared cable in the house, we paid $30 for it. And that was like beer money, right? Because we didn't use cabs a whole lot, because we didn't think like, well, let me just use a cab right now. It was like, oh, shit, it costs money. We didn't have streaming, we didn't have any of those things. So all in all, I'm spending $30 a month on throwaway money before the beer. As you move to Amy, 10 years ago, what was she throwing away money on every month?
$100.
Well, she had her cell phone now. That was interesting. She got a cell phone and they were really expensive, and she tried to keep it below $100. And she would like crimp and save. Did she have Netflix yet? Dropbox, no. Spotify, Uber, no. So everything was another kind of expense. You kind of watched it. This group, what do you think their monthly ephemeral spend is approximately? Now we're talking like the crowd I work with, so like Silicon Valley, they have money. I'm not talking about the center of the state.
$1,000 a month.
It goes, so the extreme ones, yes, actually, because many of the students I work with, I mean, the people I know right here, are not from this country. And when they go to call their family and friends on their cell phones, they not only rack up minutes, but they start pushing in international rates. One of my students in particular, two of my students, are always calling their grandfathers, who happen to be like scions of industry, back in Bangladesh and back in Egypt. So they just rack up their charges. Average right now for US 22-year-olds, $300 a month. And you start backing out, you figure out why. Data plan on their cell phone, data plan on their iPad. What else? Spotify, Netflix, Dropbox, because they all have private Dropbox accounts where they pay for it. This just begins to add up. So now if you say to Amber, hey, let's go out to dinner and throw $300 down at the table, or spend $30 per person to support, her price sensitivity is very different, and we don't know what that means. But I'll tell you, when I go out with this crowd, they buy not only hors d'oeuvres, but like 2 hors d'oeuvres and the main course, and then they get dessert, even if they're not going to eat half of it. It's just a different price sensitivity. So this is comparison tool. You're exactly right. It could be, actually, we want to stick with this customer as well. Then you bring in the generational thing, which is what we're going to talk about. You guys recognize this as a standard model that we used to say there were 3 dominant generations in the US. There's actually 5 dominant generations in the US right now. What dominant means is that there's so many of them that we care about. What's the generation off the right side, the oldest generation in the US? The silents. They're actually still around, the World War II generation. If you look at the birth years for the millennials, you realize the birth years for the millennials stopped in 2004. that means that there's 10-year-olds behind them that are from another generation. And I'll tell you, what would be the difference between a millennial who grew up when they were 14, got their cell phone, if you look at 2004, maybe when they were 10-year-olds got their cell phone, with a child born today. What is a child born today going to be given the moment they're born? Cell phone, iPad. It's going to be the iPad, right? They're going to put a tablet in front of them, and then we're going to make believe that that was what we should have always done as good parents. And we're going to be like, oh, Curious George is very educational, so we're going to let them watch Curious George. And then we're going to be like, oh, they've got this great ability. They move over to the drawing app that Autodesk does, very creative. And you say to yourself, this is really interesting. We are deluding ourselves as parents, but at the same time, they're being trained to consume media in a way that no one's been trained before. This generation, it was on the TV. They had 100 channels. The new generation, it's on their tablet, and it's both interactive and entertaining and deep, and works on the plane. They care it was completely personal how they're going to consume and use information. They're going to grow up differently. We just don't know how. And as you start to look at the generational stuff, you begin to see things. Also, perceptions of them. They are close to their parents. I would say politely, they need feedback. I mean, we all know from industry, we always read articles every day about millennials. My God, why do they need so much goddamn feedback? Like every day they're asking us, like, did I do well today? Yeah, I'm sure you did fine. Why are you bothering me? Again, I'm Gen X, so I'm a little cynical. But you begin to see very much need feedback. They were the web generation. They're now leading a lot of the cloud companies. You go look at Box and Dropbox and Evernote, right? These are all led by younger guys. Gen X, valued independence, highly pragmatic, which means they're kind of cynical. They grew up with the PCs. They led the Web 1.0 companies. Go look at the Web 1.0 companies. They're all guys my age, and we're all graying now. We're all getting tired. We're all kids now. So it's interesting watching the transition. We're going to look at the same thing with boomers. We can look at the same thing with the youngest generation. The silents are interestingly being paid attention to a lot right now. Why are the silents being paid attention to? There's still a good number of them. They have a lot of money. And a lot of money means you pay attention to them. So this is kind of the changes. You also begin to couple them together. And just to show you, this was actually something my millennials did. A couple months ago, we were doing a little project. We said, what are you guys? And they said, okay, here's what we are. We love the sharing economy. And they will not stop talking about sharing economy. They believe everything's in the cloud. We literally said to them, what would happen if you lose your cell phone? And they're like, buy a new one. Like, but what about all the stuff on it? They're like, it's all up somewhere in Dropbox or Gmail anyways. So they've been using Gmail forever. They talk about this. They like collecting experiences. Now, part of it is they don't have houses yet, so they can't collect stuff like we do. But likewise, you're hearing a lot about, they want to go out to the cool hip place. They always want to be part of that crowd. Emotional is a very big issue for them. Things are about emotions. And I think it's one of the reasons we're seeing a lot of EQ testing going on right now as well. It's really going to help this generation. Very family-oriented. Contrast this with friend-oriented. A lot of Gen X, you talk to Gen X, generation ahead, they'll say, oh yeah, I hang out with my friends every night. This crowd talks to their family every day. I talk to my family once a week. I didn't think I didn't like my family, but they're so family-oriented. Always social was the word they used. Everything was about showing up and being social. Mobile and connected, this was interesting, they didn't disconnect those words. They didn't say mobile was one and connected was another, which is what I've seen a lot of people my age do. They said mobile and connected was one term. They kind of collapsed it. And then finally, low commitment. They'll switch instantly, which is very hard for marketers to do. So this was, again, going back to the tool we used earlier. I said to the students, what are you guys? And they immediately did 8 of them. And they were like, yeah, it's about right. And they moved on. So this is one thing I would leave you guys with, and we can jump back to this in a second, which is we can play with a little future user. But I'll jump to this slide first. All of this is documented. The Finnish government sponsored us to write this all down about 2 years ago. There's a free playbook on the web. If you go to either my site or you go to one of our partner sites, you can download the playbook. It's about 250 pages, free PDF, everything's in there. It's the way we teach. It's all the tools. And we're actually now converting this, that's the most exciting part. We've done play cards with this, we've done a playbook with it, we've done a lot of online teaching with it, kind of MOOC type stuff. And what we finally found is the 2 biggest uses for it are basically take the playbook apart. No one likes books anymore. I love books, but no one likes books anymore. Take it apart and turn them into kind of like tear sheets. So the front is the lesson and the back is an example. You can start working on it right now. Free download from the web. We're doing that with all the tools and a whole series of new tools we're doing around product development. And then they said, okay, we want a new online platform. And where do you think everyone wants their online platform to be?
Oh.
And in their hand. No computers. It's interesting. Everyone says, this kind of learning, this is the kind of thing I do on the train ride home, Germans. It's what I do in the cafeteria between meetings. It's what I can do right as I'm about to walk into that big presentation. I'm like, crap, I have to run a user study today. How the hell do I run a quick user study again? So what they've asked us for is they've asked us, put my other phones away. They've asked us to say, put it on the phone. so I can look at it very quickly, and it's got to be fast. So we're using a bunch of MOOC-length videos, like for the last 2 years, let's say anywhere between 2 and 10 minutes. Anything more than 3 minutes, no one wants to watch it. We're actually going to do 3 videos, so each one is going to be broken into a 30-second video that says, here's when you use it, here's why you use it, and here's what to expect from the outcome. Done. Is that the tool you wanted to use? If not, go find another one. And then a 3-minute video that kind of walks you through it, like we were doing here. Like, grab your pen. Let's do one. Now, I'm going to use this example, but it's meant to be very much pull along, very friendly. And the third one is, now let me show you a longer example. And they want it all broken apart. We spent last spring doing it with students. They loved it. We spent this summer doing it with a very large bio firm, farming firm in Switzerland called Syngenta. They loved it. It actually worked for a variety of reasons as well. It was really good. They had distributed teams where every member of the team was basically in a different continent. So they could never really come together in the same phone call. So they would watch these little bite-sized lessons that were very tangible. Do this, now you can see how you did it. Try it again. Here's 3 examples. Now get on the phone with your team when everyone's kind of off hours. And you could actually do it remotely. Everyone would just be like, okay, let me point my cell phone at the page for a minute while I draw, and then you everyone take a picture, and everyone could see it. And it was very interesting to watch them try to collaborate before we brought them all together. And once we brought them together, they just had this facile ability with the tools. So we're now shifting everything to online. But what I'll leave us with is, do we want to develop a customer, your future customer? You don't have customers in this sense. You have partners, how they might be changing. And that's another way of breaking this. Is this B2B companies? Is this B2C companies? Might be an interesting way to do it. Another one we actually found is that because this is just a comparison tool, Volkswagen actually took their Golf cars, the Golf does Golf 1, Golf 2, Golf 3, its car series. They actually did a comparison between their Golf series because they realized that was how they wanted to think about generations, the changes that occurred, and the foundations that are different. You have a question?
Yeah, do the exercises and the approaches take you all the way through, now that you have all this, what do you do with it? Because I think that's an area that I know is always, so like in user research and user studies, people get all sorts of insight, and then they go off and do whatever they're going to do,
Yep.
or whatever.
So
how do you translate that meaningfully into real areas of practice? And while I'm at it, a second question would be, do you think of this as mostly good for new innovation and new ideas, or is it also useful for kind of more incremental improvement and ongoing development of existing, products and that sort of thing?
I think it can be used for anything. Functionally, I've seen it used for both. So I've seen it used and I've seen it used, we've taken this, so when I take it off campus to companies, and the Innovation Leadership Board actually delivers it, I'm using it for testing, right? I've been trying this. We've tried this now in Africa multiple times with the banking industry, with the transportation industry. We've used it in Korea with the food industries. We've used it in India with farming and energy and water delivery. We've used it in air travel. We've used it in manufacturing. Volvo Aero, which is, they build rocket ships, but they also build nacelles outside of your Rolls-Royce engine when you're on your Airbus, right? So that's the tip blows, it goes into their nacelle, and hopefully you don't die. But all these guys with hard product, soft product, service product, it works. Oddly enough, I tried it, didn't expect it. I didn't expect it to work with the food industry in Korea at all. And it worked just fine because everyone had stories to tell. Everyone had customers. Everyone had, they needed to get their teams on the same page. That's what this really comes down to. Each of these tools is abstracted so that they do something very quickly, so they don't add up. Where does it go? If you do a lot of the tools together, back to that earlier drawing I had, we actually told people, if you do these 4 in a row, you'll actually get to an ability to make a strategic decision. Here's how you make the decision. Where we've been asked to couple it to, actually, is the best question, which is, we've been asked to couple it to Blue Ocean Strategy, to Lean, to all these other programs people are using for much more of the tactical delivery stuff. I was just talking to Axel Springer yesterday. They have a house up in Palo Alto, it's literally a house. And we were talking to them, and they do design thinking via Hasso-Plattner's model in Germany. They then couple that to Lean, they're thinking of switching to Kanban, and then they do A/B testing. And I said to them, great, you're tactical. How do you know you're picking the right customer? Friendly guys. And they were like, that's our biggest problem right now. We adopted all these processes around delivery, but we're not seeing ourselves we're not getting products to market faster or better. And that's what's killing them right now. They've got all these processes, they're doing stuff, the new software model is their software companies, so they're all software stuff. But the products aren't getting better. And the guy in the room was a little older, and I said, okay, what's the difference between the way you used to work and today in terms of how to define right products? He said, sadly, the right products were, we had to find the big picture, we had to find an insight, then we had to kind of question what we were doing before we started chasing this path. And that's what the tools here were developed for. It was meant to kind of step everyone back, start with the bigger picture, get everyone on the same page. We're finding this really immensely valuable to get older and younger people in the room. We were told by the Germans that let the engineers talk to the marketing guys. That was one of the funniest insights ever. We were with Mercedes, and they were like, oh my God, this is great. The marketing guys and the engineering guys can talk to each other and not yell at each other. And the reason is no one owns these tools. No one owns the conversation. It's not like, let's do the strategy tool, let's do the MRD. So we're finding with younger and older as well, because like I said, I get 20-year-olds in the room. They use iPhones, I use iPhones. They use Box, I use Box. But when I actually like kind of poke at them, the reasons they use this stuff is vastly different because the expectations are different. So the handoff to making it real is something that we work on the coaching side at this point. I've been trying to figure out how to process on making the process standard. What we finally came up with was last November, we were sitting around with a bunch of German partners, and they said, again, if you gave me a video and showed me how to connect it to Blue Ocean strategy, I would pay you the rest of my money. Because what they do is they do Blue Ocean strategy. And I'll jump off here real quick, try and go back. It's an interesting handoff. It's very easy. I'll show you how to do Blue Ocean strategy. Start your problem, capture the complexity. Do a little bit of progression curves. Pick a couple of them and just kind of, so right side is today. Draw a couple of curves, kind of doing technology, and just say, well, how did we get to where we are? And this is usually a really insightful thing because the younger kids have no memory, and we all have lots of memory, and we're completely wrong on the dates. This is where Wikipedia becomes really valuable. So you say to yourself, okay, so one of the big issues we're going to talk about is cognitive development, cognitive computing. Well, let's start tracking it back. What the hell is cognitive computing? It's a new name, but we've done things like this before. Well, part of it's NL, part of it's AI. Hell, it's an expert system at its core. You talk to a 20-year-old about expert systems. This was a big insight class. I had a couple of postdocs in the room with me. Oh yeah, expert systems, blah, 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 blah. The kids were like, what the hell's an expert system? Well, like, you realize like some of the eminent guys are in our faculty with CS made their careers in this. They're like, what's an expert system? They had no idea. They didn't go to college degrees. They had thought about it. So you walk it back and you say, how did we get to where we are today? It lets you have a little conversation, get everyone on the same page. Both of these are very divergent tools, even though they do converge. And then you say, now with this understanding, very lightweight, jump to doing what's called a white spot map, which is really just a 2x2 with a blue ocean in it. So you guys know Blue Ocean Strategy? You guys know the phrase? Very big book, very popular in management science. The idea is you should put your products, your big innovative products, in the blue, soft ocean where there's no ships there already, versus the mixed up, bloodied ocean where the sharks are, or the one where there's a lot of ships. That's the whole damn theory. No offense to the people that wrote it. Made a ton of money, CEOs love it. And yet you say to yourself, yeah, but how the hell do I find a blue ocean? Well, what you do is you build a strategy map. Now, the 2x2, if you realize, if this is 8 aspects, this breaks down into kind of 2. Actually, whenever you do a 2x2, it's not actually 2, it's 3 to 4. It has to do with the way you create them. But we show people how to quickly, I mean, you just walk through it. You walk to here, you walk to here, you can walk to there pretty quickly. And the hardest part of doing a 2x2 is not figuring what the x and y axis are going to be. That's pretty easy. The hardest part is figuring what the endpoints of an axis are going to be. So let's say that we wanted one of the axes to be, smarter and dumber because we think it's cognitive, right? So there's dumb cognitive and there's smart cognitive. I'm sure you could go on for hours about like, that's not cognitive, yeah, but someone called it that and there's a press release now, and crap, okay, it's over there. And then you say to yourself, well, but is smarter and dumber the right endpoints? Maybe there's another thing. So someone like you would come in and say, no, this is a new nuance we want to pick up. Or maybe we want to go read what's going on in the space. So spending the time to try and figure out what the endpoints is going to be is actually the hardest part of the problem. What you then end up is a simple 2x2 that any business school works in. You start putting examples in there. Put Uber in and figure out how smart it is and put all these other pieces in. Uber is interesting because it uses the cognitive power of 2 people trying to connect, but it lets us figure out through a mediated interface. Whereas in the old days, I'd call a phone company. I wasn't sure about how smart the guy on the other end of the line was, but he would then call and dispatch somebody, and I had no connection to them. So you were missing the fact there was 3 people working together, but they weren't coordinating in any way. Now this little Uber thing, I can look at it really quickly and go, there's no car close enough. Let me switch to the other car system. Okay, there's a car close enough. So it's using my mental power. The software's not doing anything. Interestingly, you put all these kinds of examples on there, and then you look for where the white space is. You look for where's the emptiest space. And when you do that, voila, you've actually found a blue ocean, which is what and a lot of European companies are like really intent on finding blue oceans and proving why they found a blue ocean. It's a way of walking into the conversation, so you can tie these things together. What we found with future users is that you couple future users with the storytelling and then build a paper mock-up. And the storytelling is really just, we say to people, pop up out of your seat and actually act it out. Classic trick, right? But when you get people to act it out, they begin to act out larger stories. And then we walk them in doing a paper mock-up, and the paper mock-ups we build, if I show you pictures, imagine you try to build the future in 10 years. So you try to build a Watson in 10 years. So I could say to you, okay, build one. Interesting that I said you build a Watson for next week, you might show me an interface, or you might build a little box and be like, this is the next version of it. It's smaller, you can have it on your desk. You build something small. When we say to them, okay, build it 10 years, what you actually end up is people immediately start building spaces out. They start building flows, they put people in it, and they can move the people around. It looks like playing Legos. And the reason is, you can't exactly tell me what all the inventions look like, but you can tell me how they're going to use it. And that became a very insightful issue when, once we figured out who Amy and Amber were, we actually put Amber out into the future and say, well, I don't know exactly what she's going to be carrying, but in the morning she's going to move not from her house, and we see, I can show you huge maps of this, not from her house to the office, but she might go from her house to the office to the cafe and maybe stay at the cafe, and here's the Uber, and the Uber's made out of paper clips, and let me move that along, and it becomes a storytelling medium. And we hadn't expected that when we first did it, but we actually we got asked to write a whole paper on future prototypes because they ended up being storyboards that were physically instantiated, and there was a whole series of learning we'd never thought of before. So we're trying to connect them all back to, and then you need to make a decision. And usually, like I said, we've done it through coaching now. We're trying to do it a lot through this little video app right now, and it's going to be a lot of, and here's how you take it here, here's how you take it here. What we found is it's not take it to one solution, it's take it, now do you want to go do user studies? Now do you want to go do A/B testing? Now do you want to go actually do more personas? Actually, you just want to go read a goddamn article. I mean, this is the biggest thing is people forget that once they've found their user, there's already 100 people that have done research on them, and you can just go find it on the web. You just had to know where to look for it, versus going in and doing deep dive user studies all the time. You can still keep doing more research. So it hands off in that way. Sorry. And my voice is getting shot at this point. I'll leave you with this. Go take your user apart, figure out who they're going to be, try and figure out if the user you're building for today is actually the user you're going to have in 5 years, and start to say to yourself, they're not. They never are. Because of accelerating futures, because of the assumptions that are all changing the people underneath you, and because of things that are coming along the way. Even old guys like myself, we're now trained that clouds are easy and secure, and they should do everything magical, which is part of the offer that I think Watson's moving into. Whereas if you'd shown up with it 5 years ago, would you have sold it as a cloud, even though clouds were nascent, or would you have sold it as a box? Well, if you were selling it as a box, the larger companies would have loved you because they were still used to buying it. Nowadays, the larger companies, even Stanford now, we've used Box.com across the entire university. The medical program with HIPAA compliance, even in the desktops of faculty, everyone's kind of been trained. So now they expect magic things to show up in the cloud, which is very interesting. And that's going to keep changing. What do they expect for mobile? When do they expect it to go in their hand next? So, take this back, run through with your team, try and figure out where your users are going. It's a nice little exercise. It takes about 10 minutes, 15 tops. And if you don't know how to do it right off, download the playbook, because the playbook actually walks you through. It's the same model. It tells you, do these 3 things. And here's how to run in a team, and here's what to expect, and here's what the conversation should be. So, with that, I'll take any other questions. If not, thank you.
Did you say this playbook was available as an app or a?
Right now it's a PDF. The app's coming. I've got a prototype coming November 1, and then I'm going to roll it out to 3 customers on January 1. We're going to roll it out in November with a bunch of people and companies and say, okay, help us iterate. What we found is that once we provided these types of tools, the next thing people asked us was product. They wanted to understand how product worked. So I went and got a very good colleague of mine who's 20 years out here, Apple, Yahoo, and Frog Design, doing amazing stuff. He did the Disney product. You guys have seen the Disney watch now, where you wear it into Disneyland Park and it follows you and it knows everything about you. And it can do things like reroute your gluten-free meal for your child to another, remember Disneyland's just all about flows of people and goods. So he worked on that, this very complicated system. I sat down with him and said, I'm hearing about products. What are the 8 questions, 9 questions, 10 questions that need to be asked at the beginning? You don't have to answer them, but you have to ask them. So we went through and he basically refined it down, and we said, okay, now let's turn these into a way we can actually get on the team and just map out, well, what's the conversation you should be getting? Not the answer, what's the conversation should go underneath? And we began to add tools like that. And then what we found is that, I was just meeting with these 3 companies last week. Most of them are, by the way, European heavy industry, Volvo, that kind of old Deutsche Bank. And they said, this is great. Now what we'd like to do is we'd like to take your tools and tie them together in a different path to end, because we know we've been using these tools a little differently than you. So we want to use the way you're teaching them, but we want to tie them into a different learning path. And we want to build lots of learning paths. And then we want to put badges on them. I said, right, we all get it. It ultimately becomes lightweight training. But I want it to be much more like Stack Overflow, which is, when you have a question around product or how to start, like look it up. So it's a leadership development platform that ends up having this new interface. You search from the beginning, it's lightweight, it's tidbits, it's very fast to learn. And over time, if you accrete abilities, you eventually get a badge, or 2 badges, or 3 badges. So that's what we're taking to the companies in 3 weeks to show them and say, okay, here's our first platform, you help us build a couple customs, and then we'll launch in January. So soon. So if you send me an email, I can easily get you guys.
And final question, how is IBM affiliated with the Foresight Innovation?
So Jim Sporer has known our design division forever and has always thrown opportunities at us. Last spring we did some work with Watson Life down in Austin. And right now I've got an instance of Watson on campus. So I'm the guy at Stanford who's been playing with the Watson instance. And again, as we're going to talk about, I'm not the computer science guy because the computer science guys look at it like, we could build one of those. It's like, fine, I'm a product guy. I desperately want this technology. And what I did was when I went around the campus, we surfaced so many different opportunities for it that the first couple of weeks was throwing them out, trying to figure out like, what did we have time for. And we finally, again, so it's partially with competition and business plan and all that. And we finally narrowed down to was a really interesting space, amazing analytics group down in our biomedical group doing telomere research, so they're looking at life extension. They've got a couple of models that are incredible, and they realized that using Watson could provide the critical insight into saying, let me ask questions in as a postdoc, but more importantly, let me start asking questions in as a scientist, researcher in a lab, like Genentech is already doing that. So they need the NLP, they need the automated, basically we're using it as a bit of an expert system. The problem then became the classic problem that I found every time someone brought me an Watson problem, which was, yeah, but you have the data ready. Like, where's the data? And that's what we've been working on pretty extensively is we've got this group now building this. So it turns out they have a mouse model, and they're turning it into a digital mouse model. It's a physical mouse model. They're turning it into a digital mouse model right now because they're already going into doing an analytics solution. But interestingly, they didn't know what they were going to do with it. They were building the model. This is a group, the woman who runs it's in her 60s. She's going over the field. She's worked with everybody, Sebastian Thrun and all those guys. So she knows analytics. But they were building it into a digital mouse model, knowing the kind of solution they wanted out here, but they didn't know how to make it happen. So that's where the Watson thing, we're like, well, let's put that in underneath, which is actually going alongside a project going on at KIT, which is in Germany. You guys have a strong connection to them. They don't have a Watson because they are German right now, and they were given one right away. But those guys have been feeding us information because they've got a 15-year EU grant to couple data analytics into same things like Google Glass with the surgeons sitting there working on stuff to be able to ask the question. Very obvious problem. Well, they've been given that task. They've got a 15-year grant, but they didn't have the technology for it. So they really wanted to use Watson, and we said, okay, you feed us how you get questions and data and show us everything the doctors are asking. We're going to feed that into our model as an example data set, and then we're going to bring the mouse model in as well. And the system will be kind of half and half. It'll be hacked. It won't be real because we don't have enough of the data yet. You really need the mouse model, and then you need the American language model, but the two of them together. So we brought into our product crowd, and I can tell you, like, everyone wants to play with the damn thing. Because, and it's in the cloud, all my students have been trained to use this. The hardest part, interestingly, is getting the 20-year-olds to pay attention to it, because when you say cognitive computing, first thing is Google everything, then they find 28 startups. Then they find, and to be blunt, they find 20 of those startups have systems on the web where you just punch a piece of data in and it gives you all the analytics back, and you're like, shit, okay, this is not, like, they don't get, like, okay, and then you log into your system and then you do this. They're very much more like throw the data together. So they've been coupling together. Interesting, the 20-year-olds have been trying to couple together a lot of the pieces around it. They found this piece that does, so the Watson instance we have access to doesn't extract features for me and give them back to me. So one of the things they wanted was feature extractors. So they threw it at a startup where you just throw a bunch of text at it, does all the feature extraction, get everything out of it, and then we can throw it into the Watson system. But the feature extractor keeps a second version on the side so we can walk through the systems together. So that's the cobbling together. But it's been very interesting working with it because it's kind of in that nascent technology stage, which my students love working with, and it's forced them to say, but once the expectation's there, how does it all change? And is this a 40-year-old doctor? Is this a 20-year-old doctor? What are we aiming for? Very interesting. So that's how I'm kind of connected to this. I've been down here a lot for conferences for decades, and Jim's always up trying to hassle me and do stuff for me. So.
Is there a question from one of the online participants? Yeah. He's asking, does the Foresight tool make quantitative projections?
No.
In feature or qualitative? And if quantitative, what variables are defined?
No. We remove the quantitative aspect. So part of my background that I don't play up much is I used to work with the futurists in the US. So I worked with the GBN, I did projects. I was on the consumer side receiving information. I spent a little bit of time at the IFTF, the Institute for the Future up in Palo Alto, working with their soft side of it. And I spent a lot of time looking at the RAND work over the years. We removed the quantitative aspects because we were trying to teach this in more of a collaborative, constructive process. And there's so many good people doing quantitative analysis that what I instead teach people to do in our depth programs is how to consume data for the people who are generating quantitative futures. And the reason is there's just so many good people doing it that it's like, hey, let's go read stuff from all these groups, consume it. OECD is an example. The OECD is generating reports on like a daily basis around the future of health, the future of safety, security, different parts of the world. They're generating so much data that became one of the other pieces. How do you consume this data? How do you go to data? So no, we don't do anything quantitative at this point. And we had a few things that were quantitative and we removed them. It was harder to teach. We're lazy teachers. Not lazy teachers. Thank you.